All right. Hello. Welcome to the first little video segment of Bio 162. Now, I'm going to be working here on my tablet and doing some drawings on the tablet as I go. If you want to draw along with me or have access to these slides, remember they are available on the PolyLearn page. Just go back and there is a place where you can download a PDF which will can be downloaded to a tablet or printed out if you want to take notes on paper. Now, if you are following along exactly in the order that I suggested, you've already seen this question and hopefully spent a little time thinking about it. It's really important when we ask you to do those things that you do try and test yourself. In the lecture, of course, we could say, everybody stop and talk to your neighbor and then maybe vote on this with clickers or something. So here we're going to try and have you go through that same process when we can. Anyway, so this is a review of photosynthesis, and the best answer for this one here is is B. And this is the one that best states the relationship between the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. You might remember from a class like Bio 161 that we're starting off with carbon dioxide, which is really carbon in an oxidized state, and then through the light reaction and the Calvin cycle, we're converting that into this is the structure for glucose, and this is carbon in a reduced state. And remember, carbon in a reduced state is those reduced carbons store more energy than the oxidized carbons in CO2. So to go from the low energy starting point, the CO2, into this high energy reduced state requires an input of energy, and this comes from some molecules you remember. NADPH, that's contributing electrons to this, and then also ATP. And these are both produced by the light reaction of photosynthesis. And then it's really the Calvin cycle where this reduction takes place. All right, so just to review a little bit more about the Calvin cycle in particular, because this is what's really important for today's material. All right, so we're starting off with this 5-carbon molecule called ribulose bisphosphate, or RUBP. And so the C5 here just indicates that that's a 5-carbon molecule. And then in the first step, which is fixation, we are taking this atmospheric CO2 and it gets added to RUBP, and the enzyme that does this is Rubisco. Some people call this the most important enzyme on the planet. I tend to agree. It stands for ribulose bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, but it's a really important enzyme because it does this fixation step for the Calvin cycle. Okay, now this is a really simplified diagram here, but the 6-carbon molecule that's created gets split into 2 C3 molecules called 3-phosphoglycerate. And then in the next step, those are reduced. And so this is really where that NADPH and the ATP from the light reaction are coming into play here. ATP to provide energy to make these reactions happen, and NADPH as an electron source. And then the result is another 3-carbon molecule, but this is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. And these are the carbons in their reduced form. And some of this can be used to make glucose. But remember that most of it is actually used here in this regeneration step to resynthesize the ribulose bisphosphate. Now, I should have said earlier, we're going to come back to this figure in a little bit, and we're going to draw in some more stuff over here on this side. So we're going to leave that blank for right now. The other thing to think about here is once the plant has made glucose, what can that be used for? Well, that's going to be used to make starch, for energy storage. Can be used to make cellulose, for structure in plant cells, and then also it can be used for respiration, right? Because plant cells in the dark, they need to get ATP, and they do that just the same way we do, by breaking down glucose using electron transport and in the mitochondria to make this would be respiration. To synthesize ATP. All right, so now I have to say in a class like Bio 161, we paint kind of a rosy picture of photosynthesis. He said like, okay, the plant's there, the light is shining, it harvests this energy from the light, it takes in CO2, and it makes sugars for itself. And it sounds like this nice, easy picture. But really, photosynthesis is hard for plants, and there are some real challenges that are going to be the focus of this lecture here. So this little series of cartoons kind of summarize it. So what we're looking at here is essentially a representation of the way most plants do photosynthesis. This is what we would call C3 photosynthesis. And now let's look at this factory worker here. So the first thing to notice is that her machines are solar powered, so she can only work when the sun is shining, right? And then here she has her raw materials coming in this way on this little conveyor belt, and these are the things here that she's trying to synthesize. That would represent a good product for her. But as you can see, there's different materials coming in off of her conveyor belt here, and as a result, there's a lot of waste, and all of this stuff, this waste product kind of builds up here, and has to be maybe recycled, or she has to do something with it. The other thing to notice is that she's really uncomfortable, right? She's working here, the sun is shining down on her, and she is kind of sweaty and stressed out. So now this is a representation of C3 photosynthesis, and the thing I want to establish here is that it is kind of inefficient, and it is also potentially kind of hot and uncomfortable, and she's really sweating a lot here. Now, by the end of today's lecture, you're going to see some solutions that plants have evolved to deal with these problems of photosynthesis, and these are represented in these other two cartoons here, where you can see as she modifies her factory, she slowly becomes more and more comfortable, and the waste becomes less. So I'm not going to say much more about the cartoons right now, except that we will come back to these later, and they're part of the quiz that you'll take at the end of this segment here. And you're going to kind of analyze these cartoons and think of how they are either good or bad representations of these different forms of photosynthesis.